Good morning, Grandma and Grandpa. Can we leave the children with you for the next 2 weeks?
2 weeks with 6 children?
Why didn't you tell us on time?
Imagine as a grandparent, you opened your door one morning expecting a gift from Santa, only to find out your son and his wife has left their 6 children for you to care for the next 2 weeks. The massive oak doors of the Billionaire mansion swung open slowly that quiet morning. The grandfather frowned, then froze. 6 tiny suitcases sat neatly on the marble floor. 6 small faces looked up at him. Wide smiles, bright eyes, identical energy. 3 girls. 3 boys. All 4 years old. Before he could speak, a car engine roared. The grandmother rushed forward just in time to see their son's luxury SUV speeding down the long private driveway. No call. No explanation. No goodbye. Just 6 hyperactive sextuplets waving cheerfully. Bye, Mommy. Bye, Daddy. The grandfather whispered in disbelief. They've abandoned us. The grandmother clutched her robe, scanning the children, the suitcases, and the empty driveway. 2 weeks. That's when the message finally buzzed on the phone. Mom, Dad, please help us. We need a 2-week vacation. We'll explain later. Love you. The grandfather slowly closed the door. Behind him, the calm, luxurious mansion stood still. Ahead of him, pure chaos was about to be unleashed. Before you see what these 6 little tornadoes did to a billionaire mansion, before the maids ran for cover, before priceless antiques were broken, and before a lesson was taught that changed this family forever, subscribe so you don't miss powerful family stories like this. Like this video to support emotional storytelling. Comment below. Could you survive 6 4-year-olds for 2 weeks? Now, let's begin the story. Their parents stood by the car, smiling in a way that did not feel right. It was the kind of smile people wear when they are unsure but pretending to be confident. The mother adjusted her sunglasses again and again, avoiding eye contact. The father laughed softly, rubbing the back of his neck as if this was all very normal. Mom, Dad, it's just 2 weeks, the mother said quickly, her voice light but rushed. The kids will be fine here. Before the grandparents could respond, before they could even ask why this was happening without warning, the father's phone buzzed. He looked down, typed fast, and slipped the phone back into his pocket. A second later, the grandfather's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. Just 2 weeks, we really need rest. The words sat there, cold and final. The mother waved again, forcing a bigger smile. We'll explain everything later, she said. Thank you so much. Then she turned, opened the car door, and got in. Wait, the grandmother said, stepping forward. What do you mean 2 weeks? Why didn't you call first? The engine started. The father raised one hand in apology through the window. We love you, he said quickly. The car began to move. Stop, the grandmother called out. Come back here. The children waved happily, unaware of anything wrong. Bye, Mommy. Bye, Daddy. The car picked up speed, rolling down the long private driveway, gravel crunching under the tires. In seconds, it was already far away. The grandfather stood completely still. He called their son immediately. No answer. He tried again. Voicemail. The grandmother dialed the daughter-in-law's number with shaking fingers. Ringing. Then silence. She tried again. And again. Nothing. The gates closed in the distance, cutting off the last view of the car. For a long moment, no one spoke. The 6 children stood in front of them, pulling at their suitcases, talking all at once. I'm tired. Can we go inside now? I need water. The grandparents didn't hear them. They were frozen in place, staring down the empty driveway, the morning sun shining brightly as if nothing had happened. Finally, the grandmother whispered, they really left them. The grandfather lowered his phone slowly. Yes, he said quietly. They did. The morning at the Billionaire mansion was calm and perfect, the kind of morning that felt carefully planned. Soft classical music flowed quietly through the long hallways, not loud enough to disturb anyone, just enough to remind the house that it was awake. The marble floors shined like glass, reflecting the tall pillars and gold-edged walls. Everything smelled clean and expensive, like fresh flowers and polished wood. Outside, the sun rose slowly over the wide estate. Gardeners moved in silence, trimming rose bushes with small scissors, shaping every flower carefully. Red, white, and pink roses stood in straight lines, their petals untouched. One gardener paused and whispered, "Another beautiful day," while wiping sweat from his forehead. Birds chirped gently, hopping from hedge to hedge, as if they also understood that this place demanded peace. Inside the mansion, the butler walked toward the front door with steady steps. He had served this family for decades and knew the rhythm of the house better than anyone. Morning tea was ready. The newspaper was neatly folded on a silver tray. "Nothing ever changes here," he said quietly to himself, smiling. He reached the massive front doors, tall and heavy, carved with fine designs that spoke of old money and power. He placed the tray on a nearby table and pulled the handle. The doors opened wide. Boom. "Grandpa." 6 voices hit him at once. The butler froze. His eyes widened. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Right in front of him stood 6 children. 6 small suitcases sat beside them, colorful and mismatched. One suitcase had stars on it. Another had a broken wheel. One was almost bigger than the child pulling it. The children stood shoulder to shoulder, full of energy, their eyes bright and curious, their mouths already moving too fast. "We are here," a boy shouted. "Is this our house?" A girl asked loudly. "I'm hungry," another cried, tugging at her suitcase. The butler blinked again, convinced he was dreaming. "Children," he whispered. "At this hour." Behind him, the sound of soft footsteps echoed. "What is happening?" the grandmother asked gently as she approached, tying her robe. She stopped. Her smile disappeared. "Good heavens," she breathed. The children spotted her immediately. "Grandma!" 2 of them shouted at once, running forward. The grandmother gasped and stepped back, her heart pounding. "Where did you all come from?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Before anyone could answer, the sound of an engine roared outside. The grandfather appeared from the hallway, his voice firm. "Why are there voices at the door?" He looked past the butler. He froze. 6 children. 6 suitcases. The peaceful morning shattered in seconds. Outside, the luxury car sped down the long driveway. "Mommy!" a boy screamed, waving his arms. "Daddy, don't go!" another cried. The grandmother rushed forward just in time to see the car disappear through the tall iron gates. She turned slowly, her face pale. They left them here." The grandfather said nothing. He simply stared at the empty road. Inside, the children were already stepping onto the marble floor. "Wow, this place is big," one girl said. "Can I run?" a boy asked, already moving. The butler cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, should I call someone?" The grandfather finally spoke, his voice low and controlled. No, the doors closed slowly behind the children. The classical music continued to play, but the peace of the mansion was gone. At first, there was joy. Once the shock faded, the children forgot everything else and rushed into the mansion like it was a giant toy. Their footsteps echoed loudly on the marble floor as they ran in different directions, laughing and shouting. One of the boys pointed up and gasped. "Look, it's a shiny sun," he yelled, staring at the massive crystal chandelier hanging above the hall. The light bounced off the crystals and danced across the walls, and the children spun in circles trying to catch the reflections. A girl tugged her sister's hand. "It's like a palace," she whispered, her eyes wide. Another boy pressed his face against a tall glass window and saw the fountain outside. Water shot into the air in smooth, perfect lines. "Water!" he screamed happily and ran toward the garden doors. Before anyone could stop him, 2 of the children were already outside, circling the fountain, dipping their fingers in the cool water and laughing as drops splashed onto their clothes. Inside, one of the girls discovered the gold elevator. The doors opened quietly, shining like a mirror. "It's golden," she shouted. The children rushed inside, pressing buttons at random. "Up. Down. Again," they yelled, jumping as the elevator moved. The grandmother stood near the staircase, watching everything unfold. At first she tried to stop them, then she sighed and laughed instead. "Oh my goodness," she said, covering her mouth as 2 children bowed dramatically in front of a statue. "They are so curious." She laughed again when one boy pretended to be a king, standing tall and waving his hands. "Welcome to my castle," he announced proudly. The grandfather watched from a distance, his arms crossed, a small smile forming on his face. "They have energy," he said calmly. "Too much energy." "But they're happy," the grandmother replied, still smiling. "Look at them." Around them, the staff stood in a careful line. The maids exchanged nervous looks, clutching their cleaning cloths. The butler adjusted his jacket and whispered, "6 children at once. This will be interesting." One of the maids smiled softly as a little girl ran past her and said, "Your house is very big." Another staff member nodded and said quietly, "Maybe it won't be so bad." For a brief moment, the mansion felt alive in a new way. Laughter filled the halls. Tiny footsteps echoed everywhere. The grandmother's laughter mixed with the children's voices, and even the grandfather let out a small chuckle. The staff watched closely, nervous but hopeful. No one knew yet that this joy was only the beginning. Day 1 started like a joke. The children had finished exploring, and their excitement turned into wild energy. The marble floors that once looked calm and shiny now became a playground. One of the boys took off his socks, bent low, and pushed himself forward. "Watch this," he shouted. He slid across the floor like he was on ice, laughing loudly. Another child copied him immediately. "I can go faster," a girl yelled, running and sliding right behind him. Within seconds, all 6 of them were sliding back and forth, crashing into chairs, spinning in circles, and screaming with laughter. "Please be careful," the grandmother called out, trying to sound calm. But no one listened. One boy slipped, fell on his back, then jumped up laughing. "Again! Again!" he shouted. Across the hall, one of the girls spotted a small red button near the wall. She tilted her head. "What does this do?" she asked. Before anyone could answer, she pressed it. A loud alarm blasted through the mansion. Red lights flashed. Doors began to lock and unlock. The staff froze. "Emergency system," the butler shouted. "Who pressed it?" The girl smiled proudly. "I did." At the same time, another boy had wandered into the dining room. On the table sat a small bowl of black caviar, carefully prepared for lunch. He picked it up, sniffed it, and frowned. "This food smells funny," he said. The family dog trotted in, tail wagging. The boy's eyes lit up. "Doggy, eat." Before anyone could stop him, he poured the entire bowl onto the floor. The dog happily licked it up, tail wagging faster than ever. "No!" the chef screamed from the doorway, holding his head. That was very expensive. In another part of the house, 2 girls had discovered the grandfather's study. The heavy wooden door was open just a little. "Look at all the books," one whispered. They stepped inside. Minutes later, a loud crash echoed. The grandfather rushed in and stopped. Books were everywhere. Papers covered the floor. A globe was spinning wildly. One child was sitting on his leather chair, turning it in circles. Another was stamping on important documents, pretending they were snow. "What happened here?" the grandfather asked slowly. The children looked up. "We were playing office," one boy said happily. The grandfather closed his eyes. In less than 1 hour, the mansion was upside down. The marble floors were wet. The alarm was still ringing. The dog was full. And the study, his precious study, was destroyed. The grandmother stood in the hallway, shocked. The staff looked at each other in silence. And the grandfather finally realized this was only day 1. At first, there was joy. Once the shock faded, the children forgot everything else and rushed into the mansion like it was a giant toy. Their footsteps echoed loudly on the marble floor as they ran in different directions, laughing and shouting. One of the boys pointed up and gasped. "Look, it's a shiny sun," he yelled, staring at the massive crystal chandelier hanging above the hall. The light bounced off the crystals and danced across the walls, and the children spun in circles trying to catch the reflections. A girl tugged her sister's hand. "It's like a palace," she whispered, her eyes wide. Another boy pressed his face against a tall glass window and saw the fountain outside. Water shot into the air in smooth, perfect lines. "Water!" he screamed happily and ran toward the garden doors. Before anyone could stop him, 2 of the children were already outside, circling the fountain, dipping their fingers in the cool water and laughing as drops splashed onto their clothes. Inside, one of the girls discovered the gold elevator. The doors opened quietly, shining like a mirror. "It's golden," she shouted. The children rushed inside, pressing buttons at random. "Up, down, again," they yelled, jumping as the elevator moved. The grandmother stood near the staircase, watching everything unfold. At first she tried to stop them, then she sighed and laughed instead. "Oh my goodness," she said. covering her mouth as two children bowed dramatically in front of a statue. They are so curious. She laughed again when one boy pretended to be a king, standing tall and waving his hands. "Welcome to my castle," he announced proudly. The grandfather watched from a distance, his arms crossed, a small smile forming on his face. "They have energy," he said calmly. "Too much energy." "But they're happy," the grandmother replied, still smiling. "Look at them." Around them, the staff stood in a careful line. The maids exchanged nervous looks, clutching their cleaning cloths. The butler adjusted his jacket and whispered, "6 children at once. This will be interesting." One of the maids smiled softly as a little girl ran past her and said, "Your house is very big." Another staff member nodded and said quietly, "Maybe it won't be so bad." For a brief moment, the mansion felt alive in a new way. Laughter filled the halls. Tiny footsteps echoed everywhere. The grandmother's laughter mixed with the children's voices, and even the grandfather let out a small chuckle. The staff watched closely, nervous but hopeful. No one knew yet that this joy was only the beginning. The madness did not stop. It only moved from room to room. One of the maids was kneeling on the floor, trying to clean up the mess from the spilled water. She worked quickly, hoping to finish before the children came back. But she was too late. A boy ran past her at full speed and tripped. As he fell, his foot swung out and kicked her hard in the arm. "Ouch!" she cried out, dropping her cloth. The boy jumped up, not even looking back. "Move!" he shouted and kept running. The maid sat there in shock, holding her arm. It's okay," she whispered to herself, even though her eyes were full of tears. In the next hallway, the butler was trying to bring order. "Children, please walk," he said gently, holding his hands up. "This is not a playground." One of the boys stopped and stared at him. Then he grabbed a toy sword from a nearby shelf. "I'm a knight," he shouted. Before the butler could react, the boy charged at him, waving the sword wildly. "Attack!" the boy yelled. The butler gasped and ran. "Please, put that down," he cried, lifting his coat as he hurried down the hallway. The children burst into laughter and chased him, their footsteps echoing loudly as they screamed with joy. In the kitchen, the chef stood proudly behind a long counter. He had cooked carefully, using the best ingredients. The smell filled the room. "Lunch is ready," he announced. The children rushed in and stared at the plates. "What is this?" a girl asked, her nose wrinkling. Another child poked the food and frowned. "Yuck." One by one, they pushed the plates away. "I don't want this. This looks funny. I won't eat it." The chef's smile slowly disappeared. His shoulders dropped. "But I made this just for you," he said softly. The children didn't care. "We want pizza," they all screamed together. Their voices shook the kitchen walls. "We want pizza. We want pizza." The grandmother covered her ears. The staff stood frozen. The chef turned away, wiping his eyes quietly with his sleeve. The mansion echoed with cries, footsteps, and chaos, and no one knew how to stop it. Lunch quickly turned into a full-blown disaster. The children had gathered around the long dining table, eyes wide with hunger, or maybe mischief, it was hard to tell. One boy poked at his plate suspiciously and then, with a grin, flung a piece of chicken across the table. It sailed through the air and landed squarely on the floor with a loud plop. "That's nothing," another girl shouted. She grabbed a roll of bread and tossed it into the air, laughing as it bounced off the chandelier's reflection on the polished table. Soon, one by one, they were throwing food everywhere. Mashed potatoes slid across the marble like they were on a skating rink. Vegetables bounced off silver platters. Gravy dripped down the sides of chairs. A loud crash echoed as a plate smashed against the floor. Then another. Then another. The children didn't stop. One boy picked up a forkful of peas and shot it at his sister, who retaliated by grabbing a spoonful of soup and flicking it back. In the chaos, one boy bit his sister's arm, not hard, but enough to make her yelp and start crying. Another child tried to intervene, only to slip on a piece of gravy-soaked bread and fall backward with a loud thump. The grandmother froze at the doorway, her hands clutched tightly to her chest. Her eyes were wide, and her mouth opened slightly as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Oh, my goodness," she whispered, her voice trembling. What are they doing?" The grandfather, on the other hand, sat at the head of the table, arms crossed, lips pressed together. He didn't shout. He didn't move. He simply watched. His eyes were calm, but his mind was working quickly, taking in every detail. Every plate smashed. Every bite. Every spill. Every scream. The room was filled with chaos. The walls were streaked with food. The chairs were askew. The polished floor was now sticky and slippery. And in the center of it all were 6 little children, laughing and crying at the same time, completely unaware of the storm they had created. The grandmother let out a long, shocked sigh, her hand shaking. This cannot continue, she whispered. The grandfather nodded slowly, still silent, still observing, as if deciding exactly how to handle this madness without letting his emotions take over. And in that moment, the dining room became a battlefield, one that would require more than gentle words to restore order. The laughter, the chaos, the wild energy, it all came to a sharp, embarrassing halt at the garden party. The grandparents had invited a few of their closest friends and business associates, a small gathering meant to be elegant and quiet, with champagne, soft music, and delicate finger foods. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the perfectly trimmed lawns and sparkling fountains. Everything was ready for a sophisticated evening. Then the children arrived. Within minutes, the 6 little tornadoes had turned the garden into their personal playground. One boy climbed onto a low table, waving a plastic sword like a king declaring war. A girl ran through the flower beds, tripping over hedges and sending petals flying everywhere. Another child grabbed a guest's hat and refused to give it back. Plates of hors d'oeuvres were knocked to the ground. Drinks spilled. The soft classical music was drowned out by screams, laughter, and the occasional yell of "No, that's mine." Guests looked on in horror. A woman in a long silk gown tried to pick up a napkin, only to have a child yank it away and wrap it around his head. A man adjusted his tie nervously and muttered under his breath, "Are these children? Really?" Another guest whispered to his wife, "Do they always behave like this?" The grandfather stood in the center of it all, perfectly still, watching his carefully planned party crumble around him. His face was calm, but his jaw was tight. Every spill, every shout, every smashed plate added to his humiliation. His reputation, his wealth, his carefully curated image, all unraveling in front of friends, clients, and socialites. The grandmother was beside him, her hand on his arm. She could see the flush of embarrassment on his face. "We have to do something," she whispered. "This cannot continue like this." After the party, as midnight settled over the quiet mansion, the grandparents sat together in the study. The air was heavy, the silence thick, broken only by the soft ticking of the grandfather's antique clock. "We can't let this go on," the grandmother said quietly, her voice firm but calm. "They are children, yes. But children without boundaries are dangerous and disrespectful." The grandfather leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. "I've watched them all day," he said slowly. "They have energy, yes, but no respect, no manners, no understanding of consequences." The grandmother nodded, her eyes serious. "Money without manners is poverty," she said softly, quoting a line she had learned long ago. "We can give them everything, wealth, toys, freedom, but if they don't know how to behave, they will grow up entitled and reckless." The grandfather exhaled deeply. "Enough is enough," he said, his voice steady. "They will learn, one way or another." They sat in silence for a few moments, letting the weight of their decision settle. The laughter, the chaos, the embarrassment, all of it had shifted into something heavier, something that demanded action. Tomorrow, the children would face rules. Tomorrow, the mansion would no longer be a playground. And the grandparents, for the first time that day, felt the full weight of responsibility and the determination to reclaim both their home and their dignity. The next morning, the mansion felt different. The sun shone through the tall windows, but there was a tension in the air that had not been there before. The children ran into the hall, still laughing and giggling from the previous day's chaos, but the grandparents were ready. The grandmother stood in the center of the hall, her robe flowing, her eyes serious but gentle. The grandfather was beside her, arms crossed, calm and tall, watching every movement. The children slowed when they saw the looks on their grandparents' faces. Something in the room had changed. "My darlings," the grandmother began, her voice soft but firm, "we need to talk about how we live in this house." She paused, letting her words sink in. "From now on, there are rules. Rules that must be followed." The children exchanged glances, some giggling nervously, some frowning. One boy whispered, "What rules?" to his sister. She shrugged. "No shouting in the halls," the grandmother continued. "We speak with calm voices. You may play, but your voices must stay gentle enough for others to hear without covering their ears." The children tried to giggle, but the grandmother's steady gaze stopped them. "You will respect everyone who works in this house," she said, pointing gently toward the maids and the butler. "They take care of you and help you. You will not hit, kick, or push anyone. You will listen to them and say thank you." The grandfather spoke next, his voice deep and even. "You will eat your food properly. No throwing, no smashing, no wasting. Every meal is prepared with care. You will show appreciation by eating politely." A little girl raised her hand hesitantly. "Even if I don't like it?" "Yes," the grandmother said, nodding. "You may not always like the food, but you must still try. Complaining is fine if it is polite, but disrespect is not allowed." Also, the grandfather added, "You will say please when you ask for something and thank you when you receive it. Manners are important. They show that you care about others and respect them." The children shuffled their feet. Some looked confused. Others rolled their eyes slightly, but the grandparents remained patient. "Now," the grandmother said, her voice gentle but firm, "if you do not follow these rules, there will be consequences. Consequences are not punishments meant to be mean. They are reminders that actions have results. You may lose privileges or have to help clean up after yourselves, but we will always explain why. You will learn from your choices, not just be told what to do." The children were quiet now, absorbing every word. The grandmother stepped closer to them and smiled softly. "We love you very much. These rules are here to help you grow. You are smart, strong, and kind. But without boundaries, even the strongest child can get lost." The grandfather nodded. "Today begins a new chapter. Listen carefully, follow the rules, and you will see how wonderful life can be when everyone respects each other." For a moment, the children looked at one another, then at their grandparents. The hall was silent except for the soft ticking of the grandfather's antique clock. And for the first time, they understood that this house was not just a playground. It was a place of order, love, and respect, and if they wanted to enjoy it fully, they would have to learn how to behave. The first hours after the rules were announced were nothing short of a storm. The children did not take it well. One boy flopped onto the marble floor and began to scream at the top of his lungs, kicking his legs and pounding his tiny fists. "I don't want to follow rules. I want pizza," he yelled, tears streaming down his face. A girl sat at the dining table and refused to eat the carefully prepared breakfast. She crossed her arms, pouted, and shook her head violently. "I'm not hungry," she declared, even though her stomach grumbled loudly. Another boy did the same, banging his spoon on the plate, sending oatmeal flying across the table. Tears came freely. Tantrums erupted in every corner of the mansion. One child stomped to the fountain outside. Another ran into the hallway, slamming doors behind him. The maids tried to calm them, the butler tried to reason, and the chef looked ready to cry again. But the grandparents stayed firm. "No yelling," the grandmother said softly but firmly. "Sit down and speak politely." "No hitting, no throwing," the grandfather added, his eyes steady on each child. "If you break the rules, you will face the consequence, calmly, without complaint." For a long hour, the children tested every boundary. They cried, shouted, and even refused meals. But the grandparents did not waver. They were calm, patient, and consistent, their presence a steady anchor amid the chaos. Then, something began to change. One little girl, after biting her lip and wiping her tears, walked slowly to the maid who had been helping her. I'm sorry for kicking you yesterday," she said quietly. The maid's eyes widened, and she knelt down, smiling warmly. "Thank you, darling. That's very kind of you." Another boy, staring at his plate, slowly lifted his fork and began to eat, carefully, quietly, without complaint. Every bite was small, but he continued, looking up at his grandparents as if waiting for approval. The grandmother's face lit up with a smile. She walked over and gently ruffled the boy's hair. "I am so proud of you. See how good it feels to try." The grandfather stepped closer, placing a hand on the shoulder of the little girl who had apologized. "Kindness and effort are always rewarded," he said. Then, with a small, rare smile, he gave her a gentle hug. "You are learning, and that makes me very happy." For the first time since their parents left, the children began to understand. There was a new energy in the house, calmer, quieter, but still filled with life. They were starting to realize that discipline did not mean no fun, that rules were not punishment, and that respect and kindness could bring warmth and affection. It was the turning point. Slowly, carefully, the mansion began to feel like a home again, not just a playground for chaos, but a place where love, rules, and laughter could coexist. Morning at the mansion had changed completely. The once chaotic halls were now filled with calm energy, soft laughter, and the gentle rhythm of 6 children learning to live with rules. The sun rose over the estate, spilling golden light across the polished floors, and for the first time in weeks, the house felt orderly yet alive. The children lined up at the front door as the grandparents descended the staircase. "Good morning, grandmother." "Good morning, grandfather." They chorused politely, voices clear and cheerful, not loud or chaotic. Each child looked at the other, smiling shyly, proud of getting it right. The grandparents smiled back, their hearts swelling. "Good morning, darlings," the grandmother said, her voice warm. "Did everyone sleep well?" "Yes," the children replied in unison, some nodding enthusiastically, others bowing slightly in a playful show of manners. Breakfast was a different scene altogether. Plates were neatly arranged on the long dining table. The children sat properly, their elbows off the table, spoons held carefully. One little girl quietly passed a serving dish to her brother, saying, "Please, take some eggs." Another boy replied politely, "Thank you," and began eating with care. Even the dog waited quietly outside, no longer the center of mealtime chaos. After breakfast, the children helped the staff with small chores. They picked up napkins that had fallen, tidied their chairs, and even helped sweep crumbs from the floor. "See how much easier it is when we work together," the grandmother said, smiling at their efforts. One child beamed proudly, realizing that helping didn't feel like work, it felt good. Later in the morning, the grandfather gathered them in the library. The walls were lined with books, portraits of ancestors, and artifacts that spoke of generations past. "Today," he said, "we will learn about our family." He opened a large, leather-bound book and showed them pictures of great-grandparents, old mansions, and family events. The children listened, wide-eyed, asking questions about their ancestors and marveling at how much history they had. "They built this house, so we must respect it," he said gently. "We remember our past to guide our future." The children nodded, understanding more than they had before. They began to see that luxury was not just about shiny floors or golden elevators. It was about responsibility, respect, and learning from those who came before them. By midday, the mansion felt alive with a new rhythm. The children laughed softly, helped each other, and greeted every staff member politely. The grandparents observed quietly, a sense of pride filling the air. The chaos of the first day was gone, replaced with laughter, learning, and a sense of calm joy. It was a luxurious life, yes, but now it was paired with values, respect, and love. And in that balance, the mansion felt complete. Night fell over the mansion, and the golden light of the chandeliers reflected softly on the polished floors. The children, still full of energy but calmer than before, gathered in the grand living room. The grandmother sat in her large armchair, a thick storybook resting on her lap. The children scrambled onto cushions around her, their eyes wide and eager. "Tonight," she said, her voice gentle and warm, "I will tell you a story about our family, a story of courage, kindness, and the people who came before us." The children leaned closer, their little hands clasped together or resting on their knees. One boy whispered to his sister, "Do you think there will be dragons?" She shook her head but smiled, caught up in the magic of the moment. The grandmother began to read, her voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the story. She told tales of ancestors who had faced challenges, of women and men who had worked hard, been generous, and shown wisdom. The children listened carefully, their eyes shining with curiosity and wonder. They asked questions between pages. Did they really do that? Or was it scary? And the grandmother answered each one patiently, smiling at their excitement. Meanwhile, the grandfather moved quietly around the room, showing them objects from the library, old coins, photographs, letters. "This is your history," he said softly, holding a faded photograph of a man in a suit. "Every decision we make, every choice, adds to the story. You are part of this legacy. You must carry it with pride and responsibility." One child reached for a small wooden box and opened it carefully. "What's inside?" he asked. "Memories," the grandfather replied. And lessons. Things to remind you of who you are and what you can become. Later, as the story ended and the children yawned, they lined up to say good night to the staff. "Thank you, Auntie Maria," one girl said, bowing politely to the maid who had helped clean up after dinner. "Good night, Uncle James," another whispered to the butler, who nodded with a small smile. The grandparents watched quietly, pride shining in their eyes. The house was no longer just a mansion of marble and gold. It had become a home where respect, love, and history were alive. The children's laughter had softened into quiet murmurs, their good nights polite and warm. As the lights dimmed and the children settled into their beds, the grandparents sat together, content. The lessons were sinking in, the love was felt, and the legacy of the family was slowly taking root in these 6 little hearts. By the end of the 2nd week, the mansion had transformed completely. The halls that once echoed with screaming, stomping feet, and crashing plates now rang with gentle laughter. It was soft, warm, and full of joy, a different kind of noise, one that made the walls feel alive instead of threatened. The children moved through the rooms carefully, their energy still bright but guided by the rules they had learned. They greeted the staff politely as they passed, saying "Good morning, Auntie Maria," or "Thank you, Uncle James," and sometimes even paused to help fold a napkin or carry a small tray. Each act of respect replaced the chaos that had ruled the house for days, and with each polite word, the mansion felt more like a home. The staff, once exhausted and fearful, now smiled freely. The maids laughed as one child carefully helped dust a low table, and the butler nodded approvingly when another held open a door. Even the chef, who had cried over smashed meals, now chuckled as he watched the children try to serve themselves politely at breakfast. "They've really changed," he whispered to the grandmother, shaking his head in disbelief. The children even worked together now. One boy picked up a toy that had rolled under a chair and handed it to his sister, saying, "Here, don't step on it." A girl helped another tie his shoelaces, whispering, "Be careful, it's tight." Little gestures like these filled the house with calm joy. The grandfather walked through the halls quietly, observing the scene with a faint, satisfied smile. The tension that had clouded the mansion for so long had lifted. Laughter now replaced screaming. Respect replaced chaos. And the staff, those who had once feared the children's power, smiled genuinely again, enjoying their work and even joining in small moments of fun. By the evening, the mansion glowed with warmth. The chandeliers sparkled above, the polished floors reflected soft light, and the garden outside seemed to hum along with the peaceful energy inside. For the first time since the children had arrived, everyone, from grandparents to staff to the little sextuplets, felt harmony. It was not perfect, but it was real. And in that calm, the family could finally enjoy what the mansion had always promised, a place of luxury, laughter, and love, where rules and values created not tension, but a home worth treasuring. The day of farewell arrived quietly, but the mansion felt alive with emotion. The children, now polished in manners and full of warmth, stood with their little suitcases packed neatly beside them. Their parents hovered nearby, still holding back tears, while the grandparents waited with soft smiles, knowing this moment would be both joyful and bittersweet. One by one, the children stepped forward and hugged the grandparents tightly. Arms wrapped around waists, heads pressed against shoulders, tiny hands clinging to soft robes, they refused to let go. "We'll come back soon," one boy promised. "We'll visit every weekend," a girl added, her eyes shining with sincerity. Another whispered, "Thank you for teaching us, Grandma." "Thank you, Grandpa." The grandparents hugged back just as tightly, feeling the love and pride swell inside their hearts. "We are so proud of all of you," the grandmother said softly, smoothing a child's hair. "Remember everything you have learned. Be kind, be respectful, and always care for others." The grandfather knelt down, holding the youngest child's hand. "You are ready to go back home now," he said gently. "But remember, this house will always be a place of love and learning for you. We are always here." The children finally stepped back, smiling through a few lingering tears. They waved to the staff, who stood in the hallway, beaming with pride. "Goodbye, Auntie Maria." "Goodbye, Uncle James," they chorused politely. The maids and butler waved, some brushing away happy tears. As the parents helped the children into the sleek car, the grandparents lingered at the door, watching carefully. The SUV pulled away slowly, children waving from the back seats, voices shouting, "Bye, Grandma! Bye, Grandpa!" The mansion was quiet again. The sun dipped low, casting warm orange and gold light across the marble floors and perfectly trimmed gardens. The chandeliers glimmered faintly in the soft glow, reflecting the calm that had finally returned. A voiceover began, gentle but firm, carrying a lesson that had been learned over 2 transformative weeks. True wealth isn't gold or houses. It isn't jewels or fine clothes. True wealth is raising children who respect others, who love without selfishness, and who carry values that last a lifetime. That is the legacy worth more than anything money can buy. The camera lingered on the grandparents standing at the gates, smiling softly, arms crossed, eyes filled with pride and satisfaction. The mansion behind them stood still, peaceful once again, the golden sunlight wrapping it like a warm blanket. As the last glimmer of the sun faded into the horizon, the house held its quiet promise: laughter, love, respect, and family. These were the treasures that no chaos could destroy, and the ones that would endure long after the children had grown. The long-awaited day finally arrived. The sun shone brightly over the mansion, but there was a quiet tension in the air. The grandparents and staff waited nervously, anticipating the return of the children's parents. They expected tired, frazzled parents, ready to scoop up their exhausted children who would be crying, whining, or bouncing off the walls. Chaos, they thought, would return with the car. The gate opened slowly, and the sleek luxury SUV rolled up the driveway. The engine hummed softly, but the house seemed to hold its breath. The doors of the car clicked open, and the parents stepped out, tired but smiling nervously. The father adjusted his tie, the mother straightened her hair, and both of them looked around, expecting a scene of disarray. The front door swung open. The parents froze. 6 children stood perfectly in a line, small suitcases beside them, eyes bright, hands folded politely. One by one, they bowed slightly, a small smile on each face. "Good afternoon, Mommy." "Good afternoon, Daddy," they said together, their voices clear and polite. The parents blinked. Their mouths opened, but no sound came out at first. They had not expected this. Their hearts skipped, their eyes widened. Where was the screaming? Where was the chaos? Where were the flying plates and spilled juice? Is this?" the mother whispered, glancing at her husband. The grandfather stepped forward slowly, calm as ever. "Your children are well," he said, simply. "They have learned to respect this home, its people, and themselves." The mother's knees felt weak. The father's chest tightened. They looked at their 6 little ones, now standing neatly, some holding each other's hands, all radiating calm energy. The mother took a step forward, then another, unable to stop the tears from forming. "Oh my babies," she whispered, her voice trembling. She knelt down and embraced the nearest child. The father did the same, wrapping his arms around another. They held their children tightly, overwhelmed by the transformation. Tears flowed freely now. The parents looked at the grandparents, their eyes shining with gratitude. We are so sorry," the mother said. "We should have prepared you. Thank you for taking care of them." The father nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "We didn't know it would be this hard for anyone else, or this hard for them. You've done so much. We can't thank you enough." The grandmother reached out, placing a gentle hand on the mother's shoulder. "Love and discipline together create strength," she said softly. "They are learning to be good, kind, and respectful. That is the greatest gift we could give them." The father looked around, at the calm halls, the smiling staff, and the orderly children. He took a deep breath. "We expected chaos, and instead, you gave us peace." The mother nodded, still holding a handkerchief to her eyes. "Peace and love. Thank you for everything." The children, sensing the emotion, shuffled forward carefully, offering small hugs to both grandparents. "Thank you, Grandma." "Thank you, Grandpa," they said politely. The grandparents smiled, their hearts full. The parents, exhausted but grateful, embraced their children fully, feeling both relief and pride. The mansion had been transformed. The children had been transformed. And the family, finally, was whole again. When the children arrived back home, the air felt different from the moment they stepped out of the car. The parents had braced themselves for the usual storm, the screaming, the running, the tantrums, the unstoppable chaos. After all, this had always been the rhythm of life with 6 little whirlwinds. But the moment the children opened the car doors, it was as if an entirely new energy had settled over them. They stepped down carefully, each footfall precise, no tripping or stumbling over the uneven pavement. Their clothes were tidy, hair neatly brushed, and tiny hands gripping their suitcases gently. The eldest girl turned and smiled politely at her mother. "Good afternoon, Mommy," she said, her voice soft but clear. "May I put my suitcase in my room?" The mother froze, mid-step, staring at her daughter as if she had just seen a unicorn. The father's eyes widened so much that his tie nearly slipped from his collar. "Did she just ask?" he whispered under his breath. "Mommy, Daddy," said one of the boys, standing straight with his hands behind his back. "Auntie Maria helped pack our bags. May we say thank you?" His parents blinked again. Not only had he remembered to greet the staff politely, but he had also used proper sentence structure and tone. Inside the house, the transformation continued. The children walked calmly through the hallways, speaking softly, and observing the rules they had been taught at the grandparents' mansion. They didn't run wildly, didn't scream, and certainly didn't throw toys around. One child even stopped to pick up a book that had fallen and returned it to its shelf, nodding to his parents with a polite, "Excuse me." The parents followed them into the kitchen, watching in stunned silence as their children greeted the chef who had prepared a light snack. "Thank you, Uncle Samuel," the eldest boy said, bowing slightly. "This looks delicious. May I please have some?" The chef, used to facing tantrums, gawked at the children in disbelief, tears of joy threatening to spill from his eyes. At the dining table, the transformation was even more remarkable. The children pulled out their chairs carefully, sat down with perfect posture, and placed napkins on their laps without being told. Each child used polite table manners, cutlery held correctly, elbows off the table, chewing with closed mouths. The youngest boy, who had once thrown mashed potatoes across the room, now whispered softly, "Please pass the bread," as he offered the basket to his sister. She replied, "Thank you," with a genuine smile, and the mother's jaw nearly dropped. Between bites, the children reminded each other politely not to reach across the table, and even reminded their parents gently, "Daddy, maybe use the salad tongs." The mother pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a laugh, tears welling in her eyes at the sight of such remarkable change. After the meal, the children began helping the staff around the house. They offered to carry trays, helped fold laundry, and even reminded each other to say thank you to the cleaning staff and to the gardener who had come to check the plants. "Auntie Maria, may I help you carry this?" one little girl asked politely, lifting a small basket carefully. The parents were left in awe. Every expectation of chaos had been replaced with calm, structured, and respectful behavior. They had expected tantrums, whining, and exhaustion, but instead, they were met with obedience, politeness, and a surprising level of maturity. The father shook his head slowly. I don't even know how to explain this," he whispered to his wife, still staring at the children as they organized their playroom together, laughing softly but without shouting or fighting. The mother's eyes were glistening with tears. "It's the grandparents," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "They didn't just watch the kids, they taught them. Taught them patience, respect, and how to care about others. And they listened." The children, noticing their parents' astonishment, walked over one by one to offer hugs and polite greetings. "Thank you for taking care of us," the eldest girl said, looking sincerely at her parents. "We tried our best to be good." Another child added, "We remembered everything Grandma and Grandpa taught us. Please forgive us for being naughty before." The parents were completely overwhelmed. The mother sank into a chair, tears streaming freely. I can't believe this," she whispered. The father knelt down to hug one of the boys, holding him tightly, unable to speak. He finally managed. They've changed completely. Completely. The children beamed with pride, realizing that their good behavior had not gone unnoticed. They felt happy to see their parents so moved, and they continued to act politely, showing that the lessons learned over the 2 weeks were not temporary. They were now part of who they were. The house itself seemed different. The air was calm. The echoes of past chaos were gone. Laughter replaced yelling. Politeness replaced tantrums. Even the dog, who once received caviar from tiny hands mid-meltdown, wagged its tail quietly at the children, now part of the calm rhythm of the home. By the end of the afternoon, the parents were still in awe. The 6 children, once wild and uncontrollable, were now joyful, respectful, and cooperative. The parents exchanged glances, eyes wide, smiles weak from disbelief, but full of gratitude. This is unbelievable," the father whispered again. "I didn't think they could. I didn't think we could ever see this." The mother hugged her children tightly, murmuring, "Thank you, Grandma and Grandpa. You've given us more than we could ever repay." And in that moment the parents realized the true gift. Their children had not only returned home, They had returned with hearts full of respect, kindness, and love, forever changed by the lessons of patience, boundaries, and care that had been so carefully taught at the grandparents' mansion. Weeks later, the grandparents decided to pay a surprise visit to their grandchildren. The mansion felt quieter than usual that morning, but the excitement of seeing the children again made their hearts flutter. They arrived unannounced, stepping out of the sleek car with a sense of anticipation. The driveway seemed unusually calm. No screams, no chaotic laughter, no echoing footsteps. They opened the front gate and walked up to the door. The mother, noticing the car, hurried to answer, slightly flustered. But the moment the grandparents stepped inside, they were met with something remarkable. The children were in the living room, just as they had been taught. They were playing together, but calmly. Each child was engaged in a quiet activity. The eldest girl was reading a picture book to her younger siblings. A boy was carefully building a block tower. Another was drawing on paper with crayons, and the youngest twins were folding small clothes neatly. Not a single toy was scattered across the floor. Not a single raised voice could be heard. The grandparents paused at the doorway, barely believing what they were seeing. "Is this really our grandchildren?" the grandfather whispered, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. The children noticed their grandparents immediately. They all jumped up in unison and ran to the door, stopping a few steps away respectfully. Instead of the wild energy they remembered, the children bowed slightly, hands neatly folded in front of them, their faces bright with polite smiles. "Grandma, Grandpa," they called together. "Welcome. We are so happy to see you." Their voices were clear, cheerful, and full of warmth. The grandmother's eyes filled with tears. She stepped forward, kneeling down to hug the nearest child. "Oh, my darlings, you've remembered everything," she exclaimed. The child hugged her back tightly, whispering, "We wanted to make you proud, Grandma." The grandfather looked around the room slowly, observing every detail. The living room was spotless, the furniture perfectly arranged. And even the little things, like the children's shoes lined up neatly by the door and a small stack of books on the coffee table, showed that order had become part of their lives. He felt a swelling pride he could hardly describe. The mother and father, standing nearby, smiled with quiet astonishment. They had already seen the change when they returned from their trip, but the grandparents' reaction made it even more real. "Come, let us see everything," the grandmother said warmly, holding the children's hands. They led her and the grandfather around the house. In the kitchen, one child politely offered to fetch a glass of water. In the dining area, another helped straighten the chairs at the table, saying softly, "Everything should look nice for visitors." Even the dog behaved calmly, lying quietly by the children's feet as if respecting the newfound order. In the garden, the children had set up a small picnic area, each blanket perfectly folded and snacks arranged neatly. One child handed the grandparents a cup of juice politely, saying, "Please enjoy this with us." The grandparents exchanged a glance, hearts full, completely overwhelmed by the children's maturity. Later, they all sat together in the study. The children listened attentively as the grandfather shared stories about family history and legacy, just like he had taught them before. Each question the children asked was thoughtful and respectful. They even took turns helping each other understand the stories, quietly correcting mistakes with patience rather than frustration. Throughout the visit, the grandparents noticed something that filled them with pride. The children's manners, respect, and kindness were no longer a temporary act. They had become part of their daily life. They greeted staff politely, offered help, and even reminded their parents to speak gently when correcting mistakes. Laughter was present, but it was soft and warm, a natural sound rather than the chaotic noise of old. The grandparents exchanged a glance. The lessons they had taught, the firm yet loving guidance, the rules and boundaries, they had taken root deeply. The children had embraced the values of respect, patience, and responsibility. As the visit came to an end, the children ran to the door, waving and calling politely, "Goodbye, Grandma. Goodbye, Grandpa. Please come back soon." The grandparents hugged each one, feeling the genuine warmth in their tiny hands and hearts. When the car drove away, the grandparents stood for a long moment in the driveway, holding each other's hands, smiling quietly. The mansion behind them was calm and orderly, a true reflection of the children's growth. Finally, the grandfather whispered, "They've truly changed, and they've kept it." The grandmother nodded, tears in her eyes. True wealth isn't gold or houses. It's raising children who respect others and carry love in their hearts. We did it, and they will carry it forever. The sunlight fell gently over the mansion, casting long golden shadows. Peace, pride, and joy filled the air. The grandparents knew that the lessons had endured, that the children had grown, not just in manners, but in heart and spirit, and that this change would last a lifetime. The morning air was crisp as the grandparents prepared to leave the house after their visit. The children had woken early, their polite energy filling the home with warmth and laughter. The grandparents, though sad to depart, had one more special activity planned before their journey home, a trip to the supermarket with the children. The children, excited by the idea of an outing, lined up quietly near the door, each holding a small reusable shopping bag they had prepared the night before. Their parents smiled from the doorway, still amazed at how calm and polite their children had become. "They're really ready," the mother whispered to her husband. "Indeed," he replied, watching as the eldest girl straightened her jacket, holding the straps of her bag carefully. "It's astonishing how responsible they've become." The grandparents gathered their own belongings, neatly placing their handbags and coats by the door. The grandmother adjusted her scarf and looked at the children. "Remember our manners," she reminded them gently. "We say please and thank you, we wait our turn, and we help where we can. Let's make this a pleasant trip for everyone." The children nodded eagerly, voices in unison. "Yes, Grandma. Yes, Grandpa." They grabbed their bags and lined up neatly, ready to go. The grandparents smiled at each one, feeling a deep sense of pride at how far they had come. The car ride to the supermarket was peaceful and even joyful. The children, instead of squirming or arguing over seats, sat quietly, chatting politely with one another about the list of items they had been given to help collect. "Grandma, should we get apples first or oranges?" one boy asked carefully. "Let's start with apples," the grandmother replied, her eyes twinkling. "And remember, we'll pick only the freshest ones. Take your time and be careful." Upon arrival, the children jumped out of the car in an orderly line, holding hands in pairs to stay together. Inside the supermarket, the children were attentive and careful, following the grandparents through each aisle. They took their roles seriously, checking the shopping list, selecting items, and even helping to place them gently into their bags. One child paused by the bakery section, peering at the freshly baked bread. "Grandpa, may we pick a loaf for later?" he asked politely. The grandfather smiled, pleased by the thoughtfulness. "Of course, but let's choose one that looks perfect and isn't squished," he said. The child carefully picked up a loaf, examining it for imperfections, and handed it to his grandfather with a courteous, "Here you go, Grandpa." In the produce aisle, the eldest girl carefully inspected the apples, turning each one gently in her hands. She handed the best ones to her grandmother, saying softly, "These look the freshest. Thank you for letting me help." The grandmother smiled warmly. "You're doing wonderfully. I'm proud of you." The children worked together as a team. One boy carried the bag with vegetables while another collected fruits. The younger twins handed items to the older children, learning coordination and cooperation. "Please pass me the carrots," one twin said politely. "Thank you," the eldest girl replied as she handed them over. Even interactions with other shoppers went smoothly. The children waited patiently in line at the checkout, maintaining proper distance, keeping their voices low, and politely excusing themselves if they needed to adjust their position. A few shoppers glanced over in surprise, smiling at the unusually well-behaved children. At the checkout, the children helped unload their bags carefully, placing items on the conveyor belt one by one. "Do you need help, Grandma?" one boy asked, noticing a loaf of bread teetering. The grandmother nodded with a smile. "Yes, thank you, my dear. You have such a careful hand." Once all the items were scanned and bagged, the children assisted in carrying the bags back to the car. They took turns lifting the slightly heavier ones and made sure nothing spilled or broke. The parents, who had followed them silently, were completely astonished. I can't believe this," the father whispered. "They've transformed entirely." The ride back to the house was calm and cheerful. The children discussed what they had helped pick out, comparing apples and oranges and joking softly about which snack would be eaten first. Their laughter was warm, infectious, and completely orderly. When they arrived back, the grandparents helped unload the groceries, placing them neatly in the kitchen. The children put away the items they could reach, all while asking politely, "May I put this on the counter? And do you want me to help with the bread?" Finally, everything was in order. The grandparents, looking around the house at the calm, polite children and the neatly arranged groceries, felt a sense of quiet pride and deep satisfaction. They hugged the children tightly. "You've made us very proud," the grandmother said, her voice thick with emotion. "Keep being kind, respectful, and helpful, just like this." The grandfather added, "You've shown us that manners, respect, and patience can turn any task into something joyful. Always remember this lesson." The children smiled, beaming with pride, and promised to continue behaving well. The grandparents finally gathered their bags, waved goodbye to the family, and walked toward the car, hearts full of warmth and satisfaction, knowing that the lessons they had instilled had truly taken root and were flourishing beautifully. The mansion, calm and orderly once again, seemed to sigh in contentment as the grandparents drove away, leaving behind a home filled with laughter, respect, and love, a place that had truly become a haven for values, family, and joy.